Welcome to our Ask an Elder Black History 2021 series, where we will feature candid conversation with key firsts within our community who have made their mark on American history. To kick off our first episode, we have Chief Judge Robert Mack Bell, an American lawyer and jurist from Baltimore, Maryland. From 1996 to 2013, he served as Chief Judge on the Maryland Court of Appeals, the highest court in the state. He was the first African American to hold the position. Without further ado, let's enjoy these words of wisdom from our very own heroes and sheroes, the Noble Project's Ask an Elder.
So, one of my questions for you is, during COVID and during this pandemic, what have you been doing to occupy your time?
Well, I have a couple of committees I've been working on, but for the most part, I've been trying to remain safe, keeping the protocols and safely distanced and wearing the mask and that sort of thing.
Okay.
But my projects, one of the projects I have is one that would educate judges in science and technology. And I've been involved with that throughout this pandemic, and I've been doing that for the last 12 years or so. And I've also been involved with an advisory board with Morgan State College, State University. And finally, I've been on a search committee for a new executive director for Legal Aid Bureau.
Oh, wow. Okay. And I also read that you were on the COVID-19 Access to Justice Task Force.
Yes, with the Attorney General. Yes, I was a member of the task force.
Wow. So you've been doing you've been keeping busy during the pandemic.
Reasonably, but not a whole lot.
Okay. My next question for you is, when did you realize that you wanted to become a lawyer?
Oh, years and years and years ago. Well, I used to read, and I tell people this, they don't really believe this, but it's true. I used to read a lot of books when I was growing up. I used to like the mystery books, and one of the books I read was Perry Mason, Earl Stanley Gardner. And if you've ever seen Perry Mason or heard anything about Perry Mason, you know it was a very activist type lawyer who was involved in trying to help people a lot. It was at that point that I started thinking about being a lawyer. Okay.
And that's interesting, because I was wondering if you wanting to be a lawyer had anything to do with your activism work in 1960 as a student.
No, it predated that.
Okay.
But it was a normal progression, I think. When the issue came up, become involved with human rights and civil rights, it was a natural fit for me to get involved in that. So I don't think it was atypical. I think it was a progression that was logical.
Okay. And could you talk a little bit about what happened June 17th in 1960?
Well, let me go back to before then and give credit where credit is due. People focus on my role in this thing, in the sit-in demonstration, but it really was the brainchild of Morgan State College at the time. The Student Government Association and the Civic Interest Group. They were the ones who planned it, strategized it, and executed it. I was saying that I was contacted to help recruit high school students to participate in the sit-in demonstration.
Yes.
And on the appointed day, which was the last day of school, we went to downtown Baltimore on Baltimore Street, and we did some picketing. And of course, we drew some counter picketers, those who were opposed to our being there, which was a rather ugly situation. And after about an hour or so, a group of us peeled off and went up the street to seek restaurants that might have been open to participate in a sit-in demonstration in those restaurants. And we went to Charles and Baltimore Street, And Hooper's restaurant was open. We went in, sat in, and the rest, we were eventually arrested and charged with trespass. Subsequently, we were tried in the Circuit Court of Baltimore, the Criminal Court of Baltimore, and convicted. And then there was an appeal to the Court of Appeals of Maryland, the highest court. We had no intermediate court in those days. And that court affirmed the convictions. Subsequently, we sought certiorari in the Supreme Court of the United States. It was granted, and the case was heard there. And they issued an opinion which did not resolve the substantive issue. It merely sent the case back to the Court of Appeals for further review in light of the changed circumstances. And the changed circumstances were that between the convictions and the hearing in the Supreme Court, the state of Maryland had passed a public accommodations law, and the city of Baltimore had passed a public accommodations ordinance. So that if we had done what we did in 1960, then it would not have been against the law. And the Supreme Court wanted the Maryland Court of Appeals to look at the situation in light of that changed circumstance. The court did, and initially affirmed the conviction. But then on motion for reconsideration, it reversed the convictions.
And so how did you and the other students get involved with the NAACP during this process?
Well, it was once we were arrested and charged, the NAACP supplied lawyers to represent us. And those lawyers were, of course, local lawyers. But at one point, Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund became involved. And they were involved, in fact, when the case went to the Supreme Court.
Okay. When did you realize the significance of what you guys did and of the case itself?
Well, it was not until I got into, I guess it was college, because Dr. Robert Gill, who taught political science and prided himself on knowing what was going on from a constitutional perspective, spent some time talking about the case and its significance. How important it was really came home to me when I went to law school.
Yes.
Because on my third year, there was a seminar in which that case was highlighted.
And did your classmates know that you were involved in it?
Yeah, everybody knew by then. When I filed my application for law school, you had to write
a personal statement,
an essay about personal statement, and you also had to advise them as to whether or not you had ever been arrested, not necessarily convicted, but arrested. And so I had to reveal in that personal statement what I had done as a high school student. And so it was well known when I got to law school. In fact, I think it helped me get into law school.
I was just about to ask, were you nervous about revealing that?
Absolutely petrified, because I had no idea I had never thought of. It's interesting. I'd never thought of consequences of what I'd done when I did it. Those consequences came home to me, or the possibility of consequences came home to me when I applied for law school.
Yeah, because my understanding is the reason that the students from Morgan College had asked you to participate because you were the president of the student government at that time.
Well, we were high school students.
Yes.
It's an interesting situation, and I don't know how they arrived at the conclusion to use high school students. But ordinarily, if you're a high school student and you went to trial, it wouldn't affect your record because it's a juvenile. But in Maryland, if you were 16 years old and you lived in Baltimore City, you were an adult, even though 16 was a minor in every other subdivision in the state.
In Baltimore City specifically, is that where most of the Black
We all
community
were.
was? Yeah.
We were all from Baltimore City. And in those days, I guess the two big communities were Prince George's County and Baltimore City, and some in Baltimore County. But the students who were involved were in Baltimore City, and I guess it was a law that was premised on the fact that there was a difference between the urban dwellers and the rural dwellers.
Yeah.
I suspect that's what it was.
And then my other question for you, this is very interesting to me. I know that once you graduated and you became a judge, you started working on different circuits with some of the judges that had convicted you in 1960 and in 1961. And how was that experience?
Well, it's interesting. I served with two judges who were involved in the case on the circuit court for Baltimore City. That was Robert Watts, who represented us, and James Murphy, who prosecuted us. I had no trouble interacting with either one of them. The only anecdote I'll tell about James Murphy is that I was called for jury duty while a judge. And while the lawyers were perfectly willing to allow me to sit on the jury, Judge Murphy was not. And he got the lawyers to kick me off. I served then on the Court of Appeals with two judges who were involved in Bell against Maryland. The first, I joined the court in 1991. In 1980, Judge Lawrence Radowski was appointed to the Court of Appeals. In 1974 or 76, Judge Robert C. Murphy was appointed to the Court of Appeals as its chief judge. I joined the court in 91, and I served with both of them until they retired. In fact, I replaced Judge Murphy as the chief judge of the court when he did retire in October of 1996.
Was there ever any discussion about your case?
Oh yeah, we everybody understood that the relationships.
Okay.
We never had any discussion in the sense that we were trying to justify our particular positions.
Okay.
It was, everybody understood it. I think Judge Radowski was somewhat embarrassed by it because he was just doing what he was told to do and what he was required to do as a lawyer in the Attorney General's office. And I don't think he believed in the position he had to take, but he had to do it because that's what his job was. Judge Murphy and I had a good relationship, always did have a good relationship throughout. And in fact, I found Judge Murphy's tenure as chief judge to be very beneficial to the Legal Aid Bureau and other underrepresented persons.
Okay. That's really interesting how everything kind of comes full circle.
Yes, it is.
And something else I wanted to talk to you is, for me, learning about you, and especially in college, reading about the activism work you and your peers did, I was curious to hear a little bit about what your thoughts were with the social movements that are going on today, specifically what happened this summer. I know for myself, I'm from Southern California, and myself, my friends, my peers, we were out protesting in my hometown and in LA. That's the closest metropolitan city to me. But I would be curious to hear your thoughts about the influx of young people protesting for the rights of Black people and for our rights to be treated as human beings, kind of as you were protesting back in 1960?
Well, I was in one sense, I was very surprised by the level of interest that the various incidents engendered. But I was very pleased that it did. But more than that, I think I was more interested in the fact that you had a more diverse group of young people, and even older people, it was intergenerational as well.
Yeah.
And they seemed to be much more intent upon getting the message across on that criminal justice issue and human rights issue than had been the case from the standpoint of the entirety of the community when I was coming along. We started, but of course, it was not surprising to me that the young people were at the heart of it, because as I think back, the civil rights movement was largely propelled by young people, guided by the church, of course, and by certain selected leaders. But it was the heart and soul of it were the young people who were not going to take the kinds of abuses that had been laid upon their parents. That was indicative of what happened at Morgan. The Morgan movement, which started about 10 years before A&T, the Morgan students were young people, and they were the ones who started all of these other organizations. So I saw this movement in last summer, its diversity, as a welcome relief to years of just plodding along.
Yeah.
Allowing things to fester and allowing things to just be as they are. I saw this as a welcome relief. And once again, I was gratified by the fact that it was young people leading it. But more importantly, I was more gratified by the fact that they had more diversity than I ever thought was possible. In fact, if you look at what's going on in Portland, it becomes clear that it's broader than a color issue. It does, in fact, have to do with human rights.
And I think especially when people who are not Black are coming to terms with the history of the country. I know specifically in Portland, there were a lot of mothers, white mothers, that would stand in front of protesters, in front of and between the police. And so,
that's my point, though. I mean, it's they really are beginning, I think, a larger segment of the community is beginning to take seriously the admonition of the Constitution that all persons are created equally. And that's true at the same time that we've got a large number of people trying to turn the clock back.
Yes.
So there is a conflict in beliefs and values that are existing at this time. And I think it's a generational thing. I think it's born of fear that turnabout might be considered to be fair play, given the fact that the changing demographics suggests that in the not too distant future, this country will not be the white supremacist country that it always has been, but will be a Black and brown country. And there's some fear that the Blacks and the Browns may act like the whites did with regard to them.
Yes. No, I think that was perfectly put. What do you think is going to happen, right? Because you lived through and you participated in the civil rights movement that allowed me to be where I am today, within my education and the privileges that I have. And so upon living through that, experiencing that, what do you think might be the outcomes of what happened this summer and what is still going on?
Well, I'm an optimist. And in that sense, I think that right will prevail. It's going to be a rocky road, of course, just as it was with the civil rights movement. But the right thinking people will out in the end. It's going to be it's not going to be easy because, as I said, there seems to be an increasing number of people who are willing to who are willing to turn a blind eye to what the Constitution requires. But I think their time and their days are numbered because I think the younger people are going to continue to come and are going to continue to be susceptible to and open to that concept that I think is probably the most basic of the constitutions, which is that all people are created equal. I think we're okay. I think it's going to turn out okay.
No, that gives me hope because you participated in the civil rights movement. As a judge, thinking about your time as a judge, what are ways that you've seen the law grow and expand, and what are ways that you've seen the law shrink?
Well, the law is a living thing. I mean, and it depends upon the interpretation that's given to it by the judges and other professionals in the field. And to the extent that you have changes, I have not seen much shrinkage. Let me just cut to the chase and say I've not seen much shrinkage in terms of the decision making. Although I am now concerned about what's going to happen going forward with the new majority on the Supreme Court.
Yes.
I changed that. I do see some shrinkage because you do see some peel back of the Voting Rights Act. You've seen some of that. You've seen some peel back on the abortion front, and you've seen some peel back on religious freedom. That is to say that in the old days, religious freedom was a shield. Now, religious freedom has become a sword. They've weaponized it so that you have the religion being used as a source to discriminate. Now, I've seen that, and that is disturbing.
Yeah.
But I've also seen, and I think you're likely to continue to see, judges interpret the law consistent with the Constitution. I like to think that that's going to be the case anyway, because when the judges take an oath, take an oath to the Constitution. They do not take an oath to a political philosophy. And as long as they're looking at the Constitution and using their skills to develop the law, I think most likely they're going to find that the law will be consistent with the constitutional precepts and promises, more so than against them. I got some faith from the fact that this last summer, or this last winter, fall and winter, some of the judges who were appointed by Donald Trump, when faced with the decision whether to accept arguments that were ill-advised, chose to follow the Constitution. So I've gotten some hope from that, and I'm hopeful that that will continue to be the way in which it will progress. Because I recall that not every judge who was placed on the Supreme Court in the old days came from a progressive or a moderate background. In fact, one of the justices on the Supreme Court, who turned out to be one of the better justices, was Hugo Black, who was a former Ku Klux Klan. So that you can rise above your background, and you don't have to live up to the preview that someone has found acceptable in order to put you on the court.
Yeah, beautifully said. Something that I'm curious about with your background and expertise, what are some policies and regulations that you think activists should be looking into right now?
Well, I think it's far be it from me to try to tell activists what to look at.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that the issues that are before us, that are confronting us, are there and are being confronted right now. I really do. I don't think that I have any that I could reach out and say, well, you ought to be looking at this. You ought to be looking.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I could, I probably wouldn't say it,
Mm-hmm.
because it is the time for these young folk, for the group that's in place right now,
mm-hmm.
to forge their own future and to determine their own present. And I don't think it's for me to try to tell them which way to go. And besides which, I have sufficient faith in them to believe that they are going to be able to search out, focus on, and deal with all of those issues that are affecting them in a timely fashion.
I didn't know if you knew, but this year there's an influx of Black students applying to law school. It's up 35%. And I know myself, I will be starting at Howard University School of Law in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you have any advice for myself or aspiring law students who hope to contribute to movements towards social justice and civil rights.
Well, let me say, the best thing that you can tell a law student is that the profession of the law
mm-hmm.
is a vital one. It is one that is infected with the public interest.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, if one thinks back through history, one will find that there have been lawyers at the center of most of the movements that have been of any particular interest and meaning to this society. I mean, we have seen lawyers make contributions which are essential contributions.
Mm-hmm.
They raise the issues, but more importantly, lawyers are the last line of defense against incursions into our legal and human rights.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing that I would tell lawyers is, go in with the idea that you are public servants who are required to protect that instrument, which or that system that we hold so dear, which is the constitutional republic. And in order to do that, one has to bring one's very best game. Be as well prepared as you can be,
Mm-hmm.
and be willing to take stands that are unpopular, with the idea, because the idea is that it is not always the popular stand that is the most correct stand, or the one that will lead you to a continuation of a constitutional republic.
No, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just really processing what you said. That was really wonderfully put. And I think those are all of my questions, unless there was something that you wanted to speak towards or talk about.
Well, no, I used to tell the lawyers, just to follow up on this last thing,
Mm-hmm.
I used to tell the lawyers at the various law schools when I was chief judge, I used to go and speak to the students at Maryland and Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
And I always reminded them that there is a difference between societies. I reminded them that Germany was a democratic republic prior to Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
I reminded them that Hitler became the leader of that society not because he staged a coup. He was elected.
Mm-hmm.
So he became a party. He became the leader of that society, of that country, by election, and through what he did after he became elected, he was able to transform that society into a totalitarian, autocratic government.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because the lawyers at that time in that place did not stand up. They did not speak truth to power.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they acquiesced in what was going on.
Yeah.
The American lawyer, I've always understood to be different.
Mm-hmm.
They're not afraid to tell people when it's wrong. They're not afraid to take an unpopular case. They're not afraid to step out and put their own professional and personal selves at risk. And I'm hopeful that that kind of lawyer, the kind of lawyer that Robert Jackson was, who was the Associate Justice on the Supreme Court, who left the bench, took a leave of absence, and went to the Nuremberg trials in order to do his part to try to reset the universal order. I hope we are producing lawyers like that who will say, I will not listen to the lies. I will stand for truth. I will stand for right. And if you're wrong, don't count me in.
And it's interesting when you were talking about the coup, because I know what happened last month, or
last
month, there was a siege. And I would be curious to hear your thoughts, because you're closer than I am in California to the Capitol and when those things were happening.
Oh, it was a coup attempt, all right. No question that there was an attempted coup. When you have a president indicate falsely that he did not lose the election, tells his followers he did not lose it, in fact, he won by a landslide, tells them to come to the United States Capitol on a specific day, and that day happens to be the day on which they will certify or confirm the certification of the Electoral College, and then tells them to march to the Capitol and not demonstrate, but to fight like hell, and that they will never be able to protect their country with weakness. They have to be strong. That's a coup. And when he calls people and says, look, find me the number of votes I need to win. And when he criticizes anybody who says that he lost, that's a coup. He's trying to change the reality. He's trying to win an election that he lost. And when you're going to deny to the victor in an electoral process the fruits of that victory, you are in fact trying to effect a coup. And he did. That's what it was. Call it anything you want, but that's exactly what it was.
No, thank you for clarifying, because I think, I mean, I personally don't like watching the news. I'd rather get my information from Twitter, from people that are actually on the ground. That's what I learned during the summer. The news will portray what they want to portray and say what they want to say, and usually it's against Black and brown people. But I think your clarification on what it was and what it still is important to note.
Let me just I'm going to push back at you for a minute, because what troubles me is that too many people are looking at Twitter and Facebook and all these other places to get news, and what they get, depending on which sources they're using or who they're listening to on Twitter or Facebook, whatever the social media is, you can have very distorted views. Marjorie, whatever, Taylor Greene, for example, got her news not from the mainstream quote unquote media, but from social media.
Mm-hmm.
And where does that lead us? Where did that lead her?
Yes.
To me, yeah, and this is something else I guess I need to say, I should have said before. Democracy is tough. It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
There is no system of government that requires more effort on the part of those that are being governed, because the governed are also the governors.
Yes.
You are required to elect those folk who will make the rules, but they are indebted to you. They answer to you because you are the rulers of the country.
Mm-hmm.
So it requires you to be engaged and informed.
Mm-hmm.
Engaged means more than voting.
Mm-hmm.
Engaged means more than just listening to the guy that you elected
Mm-hmm.
to determine what is right or wrong. It requires you to do something on your own to verify what's going on or what's being told. And informed is exactly what you're supposed to be trying to do, to become informed as much as possible. And the information that we're talking about is truth,
Yes.
not opinion. There has to be, if the society is going to work, there has to be something called truth. There has to be some facts. You can't have variable facts or different truths. There's got to be one truth. And it is a responsibility of each of us to determine what that truth is. And we have to do it from different sources, all sources. And we
Yes.
have to be discerning in how we do it.
And that was my next question for you. What do you think would be your what would be your method to find that truth? And I think that what you said is very important. And I should have prefaced what I said in looking at Twitter and looking at CNN and looking at MSNBC and Fox News and having that critical view to discern the truth in all of it.
Yeah,
And
you
I
got to
think
look at everything.
mm-hmm.
You got to look at everything. But you've also got to bring to the table some common sense.
Yes.
I mean, not everything somebody tells you is not true, obviously. And you got to learn how to determine what to accept and what not to accept. And you have to be not afraid. You have to be unafraid to discard the untruth from the truth. And it makes no difference who's telling it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you are a Democrat or if you're progressive or you're moderate and somebody in your group tells you something, the fact that they're in your group doesn't make it so.
Mm-hmm.
But you may very well accept it more readily, but you still have that obligation to do the fact check.
Due diligence, yes.
And you've got to determine whether or not it really is, in fact, as that person says it is. Otherwise, what we'll end up with is what we've got now. A group of people, a large group of people, too large a group of people who believe any and everything a particular group says, whether it makes sense or not.
Yeah.
And if you listen to some of that stuff that they are spouting, it makes no sense. And all they need to do is to do an analysis of it in light of their own personal experiences in many instances, and they could debunk a lot of it. But they don't do it because they do not see their role as being as involved and as important as a democracy demands.
Mm-hmm.
Engaged, informed citizenry. If you don't have that, you don't have a democracy.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. And
Okay.
even on because we're touching kind of on fake news and the implications of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when you were younger, right, so for me and the knowledge that I know and my experiences,
Mm-hmm.
I find that through social media is where a lot of things were able to be debunked in a way that they weren't, because I find now that anybody, right, can be a journalist in their own right. And that comes with good things and that comes with very bad things. And so I'm wondering the way in which you were able to critically think and to debunk fake news before social media and even maybe before the internet.
So we didn't have it. And, we believed in the media, the papers. We had, but you see, the interesting thing is, when I grew up in Baltimore City, there were several newspapers. You had the Baltimore Sun came out in the morning. You had the Evening Sun. You had the News American came out in the morning, and then the evening News. So you had the Afro, and you had different papers. To be sure, they had different viewpoints, but there was never any question about what the fact was. I mean, a fact in the Baltimore Sun was not different from a fact in the News American.
Yeah.
So you didn't have that push and pull, except to the extent you had a fringe group of people who believed strange things. But they were fringe people, and everybody accepted them as fringe people, and they treated them as fringe people. And you didn't have those people being pulled into the mainstream or being catered to.
Yeah.
So we don't have the same problem that you all have. We didn't have too much news. You've got too much news. And so I didn't have that choice. But I lived in a time when people agreed on facts and they believed in reality. Now you've got a situation where, while we may say we believe in facts, your facts may be different from mine. And there are those who say that's all right. And I say you can't run a society that way. So what do I do now? I do very little social media. Very little. When I want to check the news, I go to different sources. One of the best sources, as far as I'm concerned, is BBC News. If I want to know, fact check Maryland, what's going on here, I go to BBC. They tend to be much more objective than many of the outlets here. That's the kind of thing I do. And then I have these discussions with my peers. We talk about these things and we knock them around and we have arguments. And then we think about our own experiences and try to bring a level of common sense to it. And then I end up with a point of view. If I listen to, and I watch MSNBC all the time, I don't always agree with them.
Yes.
Even the ones I like the best, I don't always agree with them, and I'll say I don't agree with them. I'm not going to go out and say so and so said thus and so therefore it must be right. No. I'll say so and so said, but he's crazy. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that's our responsibility. I mean, how we do it may vary, but we have to do it. We use as many sources as you want, but don't just lay down and accept what they tell you. That's all.
Especially without critical thinking.
Exactly. And please use some common sense.
Yes. Let the people know, because I don't know. Thank you so much for your time. This has been very enlightening for me, especially as somebody who has been very inspired by your work and very inspired, even though you kind of fell into it. Even your work at Hopley Restaurant, it's very inspiring. And I know right now there's an LDF fellowship for under Marshall and Motley. And that's something that I'm really interested in. And upon looking in through what Constance Motley did and what Thurgood Marshall did, that's kind of when I ran into what you did. And it kind of came full circle because I was asked to speak with you. So this has just been really enlightening for me. So thank you.
By the way, Constance Motley represented us.
Yes, I saw that, which is
Yeah,
crazy because she was the first Black woman, right, to
that's right. Yeah.
represent, I guess, or to bring a case to the Supreme Court. And so the fact that you even got to like shake her hand
I did.
is
I got to know her. I got to
that's
know her, and I also got to know um, Jack Greenberg, who was also on the case. He was the one who replaced Thurgood Marshall at the
mhm.
Legal Defense Fund.
And
So I
yeah,
got to know them.
that's crazy. And the Legal Defense Fund represented you. And
Oh yeah.
I think something that I have been thinking a lot about is just at what point, and you had kind of touched on it, but at what point did you realize not even the significance of what you did, but just the significance of the people who were speaking with you and all of that?
Well, it all comes around the same time. You see, we all knew, at least I did. I knew about Thurgood Marshall growing up. I mean, after all, he's from Baltimore, and so he was a giant to us all. I did not know some of the other actors or players, but I learned those folk as I went along. And as you start to study cases and you start looking at who was involved, you become interested in knowing more about them, and then you find out, and that enhances your body of knowledge.
Yeah.
Then I
Because
didn't
when you were
learn
in
about.
law school, you could contact them and ask them about the cases.
Well, if
More
you
or
had the
less.
nerve,
Yeah.
if you had the nerve. Not all of
Wow.
us had the nerve, you know. Celebrities were celebrities too. Juanita Jackson Mitchell, I got to know very well and
Wow.
became very good friends with. But some of the and Robert Watts, who represented me, I got to know them. But some of the more national figures, I did not get to know as well, nor was I as comfortable calling them as perhaps I
Yeah.
should have been.
I mean, the fact that you were able to shake their hand is amazing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This was a very lovely opportunity for me, and I really enjoyed speaking with you and getting to know you a little bit, especially within the way that you are seeing what's going on currently and relating that to the experiences that you have had.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
This message has been brought to you by the National Black Leadership and Empowerment Project.